We've got to admit, the boy wonder is looking pretty spry for an octogenarian. Batman has been beyond and back over the last 80 years, but even during his darkest days, he's always had a Robin by his side. The character has been reinvented countless times across comics, television, film, and video games, and become a generational hero.
He's an important character in the entire archetype of comics.
I think the fact that Robin is the first character to become an adult character on their own, that made him special because nobody else had ever done that.
I feel like Nightwing is one of the best characters in the whole DC Comics stable.
Robin is a stand-in for the reader in a lot of ways. He's the Watson to Batman's Sherlock Holmes. He's more than just a sidekick. He's Batman's alter ego, his human side.
For most of his 80 years, Robin has lived in the shadow of Batman. But not anymore. Robin has evolved from sidekick to titan to super spy, even team leader. Doesn't matter whether your Robin is Dick Grayson, Jason Todd, Tim Drake, Carrie Kelly, Stephanie Brown, even Damian Wayne. Robin stands on his own. Let's go behind the panel for Robin's 80th anniversary.
The idea of taking the grim figure of Batman and giving him a sidekick who embodied not just the visuals of the circus acrobat, but the devil-may-care, daredevil attitude of it, was a very magic moment in the 1940s and helps define what sidekicks would be for superheroes going forward.
Introduced in Detective Comics number 38, Dick Grayson saw his circus acrobat parents killed by gangsters trying to shake down the circus. He's taken under Batman's wing, and by page 3 of his first appearance, he's taking an undying oath to fight crime. That 80-year-old comics milestone remains a bucket list item for collectors.
People are really excited about this anniversary. I've seen sales throughout the Golden Age all the way up to present on key Robin appearances going up, up, up. This comic book is the first appearance of Robin ever. So it's a 3.0 on a scale of 1 to 10, and this comic book would sell for approximately $30,000 today.
Robin's debut gave young comics readers their first superhero stand-in. Batman was a man with a mission, but he was a grown-up. For the kids, Robin was cool and, more importantly, relatable.
I once proposed to my dad that since we had a car, we could turn that into the Batmobile and we could go fight crime together as Batman and Robin. And he didn't think that was the best idea.
I think for a long time he was just an interesting sidekick because he lasted longer than anyone else, and he lasted longer because when all the comics were canceled in 1950-51, only Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman survived. So he was the only teen character.
Fun fact, historians say Robin appeared in more Golden Age comics than Batman. How is that possible? Along with his monthly adventures in Detective Comics and Batman, he had his own solo adventures in Star Spangled Comics from 1947 to 1952.
Well, in the 40s, having a sidekick gave you somebody who the young kids who were buying the comics could identify with. That was the theory.
I'm a big believer in the fact that the mere existence of Robin makes Batman as an idea so much better. Think about what Batman is without Robin. He's just a guy who's so upset and angry about some that happened to him when he was a kid. He can't get past it, and he goes up and dresses up at night and beats people up. With Robin, all that changes. He's like, something bad happened to both of us when we were kids, and I want you to turn out better than I did. And I think that's such a powerful part of the Batman mythos that doesn't exist without Robin.
It wasn't much of a shock when I asked people to pick their favorite Robin who the most popular answer was.
I would say Dick Grayson.
Dick Grayson's definitely my favorite Robin.
Is there another choice besides Dick Grayson?
Dick Grayson.
Dick Grayson.
Dick Grayson.
Dick Grayson?
Dick Grayson, hands down.
Dick Grayson was the original and still the longest-serving Robin. He also had the good fortune of being the Robin many fans met in other media, like the 1960s Batman series. To a generation of fans, Burt Ward's Dick Grayson is the ultimate boy wonder.
Holy sardine! Holy ravioli! Holy birthday cake! Holy fruit salad! Holy headlines. We look like page 1 dumbbells.
I think the show was so much silly fun that both Batman and Robin were just loved. They were fun characters. It was a fun show. When you see something on TV and they are fun, I think you just gravitate towards them and you love them.
Still, other fans discovered the character on the Super Friends cartoon or in the backup features that ran during the latter half of the 1970s in Detective Comics, when Dick Grayson went off to college.
So Dick Grayson is the exact same origin as Batman. Dick is Batman's greatest triumph. To raise something with that kind of optimism and that kind of outlook on the world. To me, it's the most hopeful aspect of all of DC.
He is somebody who, despite the trauma that he has faced, remains sort of resilient. You know, if you think about Batman, who has this horrible core wound that rises out of Crime Alley and became a dark, spectral figure who uses fear against his enemies. Dick Grayson, despite the gauntlet that he's traveled, is the very opposite of that.
He's always taken action. He's a good leader. He's a kind guy, but not too kind on villains. Brooding, but he's not emo. He's just a very likable hero.
Every fandom, they've grown up with Dick Grayson. So if you were a kid in the 50s and 60s, you grew up with him. And in the 60s, he was on a TV show, you grew up with him. In the comics in the 80s with Marvel and Teen Titans. And then into the animated series. Every generation of Batman fans gets to grow up with Dick again. I think that's what makes people attached to him. That's part of his appeal, is that he grows with you.
So that's it, right? Dick Grayson grows up, goes to college, and that's the end of Robin? Nope, not by a long shot. By the end of the 1970s, Robin had now been a teen sidekick for about 40 years.
I think the fact that Robin is the first teen sidekick, but also the first character to become an adult character on their own. They always stay the same age. Characters never grew older in comics. And in this case, we had a character grow up, move out on his own, and become a hero on his own. That made him special because nobody else had ever done that.
As the 1980s began, writer Marv Wolfman and artist George Perez teamed up to reimagine DC's former team of sidekicks, the Teen Titans. Grayson was the leader, which made sense, who had more experience to lead the team than the first sidekick. He eventually dropped the Robin moniker entirely and became Nightwing.
I feel like Nightwing is one of the best characters in the whole DC Comics stable because he's the guy who gets to graduate. He's the guy who's been the sidekick and then gets to craft his heroic identity and be successful as basically a grown-up, right?
Once again, Robin was making history. As part of that iconic Titans era, Dick Grayson became the first character in the DC universe to mature, from Boy Wonder to Teen Titan, and finally become his own man.
What had happened was we had Dick Grayson in the Titans for a number of years, and finally the Batman editor said he really wanted Robin back. They wanted to put Robin back into the Batman book, and they wanted to make him young again. And I fought that, not Robin going back into Batman, but I fought the idea that he had to become a younger character. It was obvious that we were going to have a stalemate there, so I made the suggestion, why don't I keep Dick Grayson and you introduce a brand new Robin? Nobody had ever done that before, and that would be a good way of gaining attention. Meanwhile, I could keep the Dick Grayson character, who is now 18, 19, 20 years old, and I could write the stories that I want to with him. Fortunately, because the Titans was DC's #1 selling book, they didn't want me losing the characters I cared about. They understood why I wanted to keep Dick Grayson, so they arranged for that.
The problem for me as the writer of Batman was that I really enjoyed the dynamic of Batman and a younger companion. Using Robin in the Batman stories was becoming problematic because he was featured so prominently in Teen Titans and was so important to the storytelling in that book that you wanted his story to be primarily focused in the Titans. So to me, to be able to use Robin meant that I needed a new Robin, and that was what, in my mind, promoted the idea of creating Jason Todd.
Jason Todd, easily the most polarizing Robin of all time. Created by Jerry Conway and Don Newton, Jason's origin at first was nearly identical to that of Dick Grayson's. But after Crisis on Infinite Earths in 1985, it was retconned to having Jason met Batman while trying to steal tires off the Batmobile. From the start, it almost seemed like DC wanted readers to be annoyed by Jason.
Look, we both know they leaned into that, right? They leaned into Jason Todd being a dick.
Todd had no shot.
Right. He works better as a prodigal son.
Jason Todd reflected the growing push for realism and grittiness that marked the end of the Bronze Age. But for his co-creator Conway, Jason was a chance to address one aspect of Batman and Robin's relationship that never really made sense to him.
The one aspect of the Batman-Robin relationship that seemed less realistic to me was that Robin was so admiring of Batman that there was no real conflict between them. There was never any difference of opinion. Robin was always going to do whatever his dad figure said, and that was not my relationship with my father, and it wasn't the relationship that I was aware of with most teenage boys and their fathers. Not to say that it had to become really a battle, but that there was always going to be a struggle for identity. Part of the teenage development cycle is asserting your own independence and asserting your own view of the world. And I didn't think that Robin, in his relationship with Batman, prior to Jason Todd, really had an opportunity to do that.
In one of the very strangest promotional campaigns of all time, DC Comics asked readers to call a 1-900 number to vote on whether Jason Todd should live or die. By a slim margin of 72 votes, Jason's fate was sealed by the fans. He would die at the hands of the Joker in the climax of A Death in the Family.
I've heard about it through the grapevine and comics that they were doing. I have to admit my reaction was a little bit appalled that we were basically going to vote on whether this character lived or died on a popularity vote, because those kinds of things are never rationalized, and you're basically setting up a situation, in the case of Jason Todd, to have him killed, because that's going to be the most vocal part of your response. As it turned out, it was.
His tenure as Robin was short-lived, but he still made an impact.
Well, I thought Jason was a good character. I had no problem with Jason. I don't think the fans liked a character who could argue. Back then, today, that would be far more normal, but back then they expected that the next Robin would be exactly like Dick Grayson.
While not quite Uncle Ben dead, Jason Todd was the rare comics death that stuck for a while. He would be resurrected, sort of, in the classic Batman Hush Tale from Jim Lee and Jeff Loeb, but not fully explained until the Under the Hood story arc. Hey man, comics. To this day, Jason remains a bat thorn in Bruce's side as the Red Hood, challenging him and calling him out on his failures. Let's go back to the 1980s. 1986, in fact. That year, Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns upended the comics industry. It tells the story of an aged Batman years in the future who had retired after Jason Todd's death. He comes out of retirement to save Gotham and finds a new Robin, Carrie Kelly. Carrie had all the classic qualities of a great Robin: brave, upbeat, and funny. With each new chapter in the Dark Knight mythos, Carrie's role has evolved. She's now taken on the role of Batwoman in the DK universe, as inspiring and fearsome a leader as her mentor. Let's go back to the regular continuity. Batman in 1989 had no Robin, and still mourning Jason was floundering. Enter Tim Drake.
My favorite Robin is Tim Drake.
No question, Tim Drake. Tim Drake.
Tim Drake?
I'm a Tim Drake guy.
If Dick Grayson is the acrobat, if he's the body, and Jason Todd is the rage, and Damian is just kind of stubbornness and kind of that chaotic evil streak, Tim Drake is the brains. He's the guy who was able to outthink Batman in his own game. He was able to find out his secret identity. He's not the strongest fighter of the Batman family. In fact, he's probably the weakest, but he's the smartest. And that means he's the one who can take down anybody, because he's the one who will think ahead far enough to do so.
When I started reading comics in the late 90s, I fell in love with the entire Bat family, and my way into the Bat family was Tim Drake. And honestly, it was because Tim Drake felt a lot like me. He was this smart kid. He was a little shy, a little awkward. He was geeky. The other Robins are a bit more dashing, a bit more James Bond, and he's always been a bit of a nerd, and I always appreciated that.
Because there were some problems with the fans with Jason, I didn't want to repeat the same mistakes. I wanted to make a character that you would care about instantly, because he cared about Batman. He cared about being a good Robin. He wanted to be a good Robin. So you care for this character. You care for Tim almost immediately. And you can look at him and the way he's able to solve problems, and you root for him. And that makes him a little bit different from Jason.
Co-creators Marv Wolfman and artist Pat Broderick wanted to do something new with their Robin. Tim Drake was motivated not by tragedy, but by a desire to become a great detective. He figured out Batman's secret identity in a way that actually made a lot of sense, and sought out Bruce Wayne. Realizing the need for a Robin to refocus Batman's mission to help people, Tim volunteered for the job.
One of the things that was great about the Tim Drake solo comics was that he had all his own stuff. So he had his own car, and his batarangs were different, and he had his own rogues gallery. Like, they were actually committing to building him out as a character that could stand on his own 2 feet and not just be a sidekick.
I like to have intelligent characters, and if you're going to have a new Robin, if you're going to have a kid Robin, not an adult Robin, you want to make sure that this guy is real smart. You also have to create a character that the fans will go, I understand why he's Robin. I wanted him to figure out who Robin was. I wanted him to put it all together, figure out why Batman needed a Robin, and why he wanted to be Robin and not Batman.
Where poor Jason divided fans, Tim quickly became one of DC's most popular characters. That's partly because he's someone the modern-day fan can identify with.
Tim Drake starts off as a Batman and Robin fanboy who figures out who they are. He basically says, hey, I know who you guys are. Batman needs Robin. I want to be the next Robin.
Not every Robin has gotten a fair shake, which brings us to Stephanie Brown. Stephanie is better known in her roles as the Spoiler and Batgirl, but she also served as Robin for a short time when her boyfriend, Tim Drake, was forced to hang up the cape. Stephanie's time as Robin is marked by her and Batman butting heads. Some readers say Batman's inflexibility and lack of trust didn't give Stephanie a fair shot. Others point to the fact that she disobeyed orders. She winds up being tortured and killed by the Black Mask when she tries to prove herself to him. She came back later as Batgirl, but then DC did our girl dirty when they retconned her time as Robin out with the New 52. But she'll always be a part of the Robin family to us. That brings us to Damian Wayne.
Damian, 100%. I love the idea that he's the biological son and trying to figure out that relationship in a world of this guy who has had all these non-biological sons who he probably knows a little bit better. I just love the idea of a little 10-year-old with a crowbar not giving anyone guff.
Damian Wayne. He's a total pain in the ass, right? He's got bats splitting around in his skull, but I love that kid.
I'm kind of a Damian fan. I like the whole dynamic with him and Batman. It's kind of cool, a little dark, a little fun.
Oh, yeah, Damian Wayne fan, okay.
Yeah, Damian's got the attitude. You know,
Yeah,
he's like the problem child of the Robin families.
After being a surrogate dad to many Robins, Damian was Bruce's shot to play the real thing. The son of Bruce and Talia al Ghul, Damian was trained as a weapon by his mother and the League of Assassins. At just 10 years old, the emotionally malnourished Damian chose to be Robin to help service his dad's war on crime. First working with Dick Grayson when he filled the cowl, then bonding with Bruce in a wonderful and warped way during their tenure as the dynamic duo. Damian completed the evolution of Robin, from Dick Grayson's obedient boy hostage of the Golden Age, to Jason's rebellious teenager, to Tim and Damian's modern Robins. The character has always been a mirror on the youth of its time. And while longevity and his general awesomeness may give Dick Grayson the edge in popularity, he's far from the only Robin with a fan base. Thanks to series like Batman the Animated Series, the DC Animated Universe, the various DC-centric video games, and even the current Titans series on the DC Universe streaming service, over time the various media platforms have been a consistent gateway for fans to find various iterations of Robin.
Well, Robin being in other media, like all superhero characters, is what's allowed that character to continue to have any kind of relevance. Right now, the mainstream versions of all these characters are the versions that appear on television and in film, because the comic book readership is so small comparatively.
The animated series, that's just a classic. Yeah, Dick Grayson and that, and even the Fallout, when they ended up him becoming Nightwing and all that. Yeah, no.
That was your gateway into the character?
It was definitely great storytelling at that time, yes.
The great thing about Robin is that like this character's evolved in so many different ways. My daughter loves Teen Titans Go, and the Robin that she's experiencing in those shows is hilarious. And he's kind of like a gruff, uptight leader who's always cracking the whip on the other team members, trying to get them to be serious. That's a totally different version of Robin than I experienced as a kid, but they're both valid.
Whether you found Robin in the cartoons, the movies, or the comics, there is no denying the impact of the character.
What do you think about that, Robin? Does it make you smile? Yeah.
I think Robin is definitely meant to be a foil to Batman. You know, no matter what series it is, a lot of times he gets the shaft, oh, he's just the kid's sidekick, but I think he's more than that. I think he's up there with best heroes in the Justice League.
He's the one who established really the generational aspect of superheroes, so, you know, and that's the sort of thing that you start getting legacy heroes out of that. You start getting reimaginations like Jaime Reyes as Blue Beetle. Robin is the first. He was the single most important addition to the Batman mythos, in my opinion, and it's because you were able to take those core elements of a character like Batman and you're able to put a very unique spin on it, and that generational aspect, I think, is really the most important part of that, to me anyway.
Robin's a POV character. He's the one who, when you're a little kid, you want to be Robin and you see through the eyes of him into the DCU. And I think that's 90% of DC fans, they get into the world through him. And as they grow up, they grow into Dick Grayson, they grow into that character. So he is the reader in the DC universe.
Without Robin, Batman is the Shadow. If you think of the Shadow character, he's from the pulp magazines. He was a vigilante operating outside the system, taking justice into his own hands. And as a loner and as an alienated figure, he's both tragic and kind of terrifying because he doesn't have human connections to other people other than to Alfred, who's a kind of a substitute father. But with Robin, he has both a legacy and a guardianship.
I think he's beyond just being an important character in the whole DCU. He's an important character in the entire archetype of comics, superhero comics in particular. He is the first sidekick. And sidekicks, the idea of creating these entry point characters for the readers of the comics to see their heroes through and to basically allow themselves to picture themselves side by side with the heroes that they love, fighting crime and doing all that. It's the aspect of DC Comics that created generations and generations of fans.
You wouldn't have Spider-Man without Robin, right? Stan Lee was basically doing, hey, what if we gave the sidekick his own book And instead of calling him a boy, we called him a man. Spider-Man is a direct reaction to Robin. And without Robin, I think you wouldn't have this sort of these teenage superheroes and that idea of the heroes kind of growing up with the readers. I think that all comes from Robin.
Hope you enjoyed this week's Behind the Panel. And if you did, hit the subscribe button for more awesome comic book videos. And remember to check out my weekly column at SYFYWire.com and listen to the Behind the Panel podcast, an audio documentary series all about comics and the men and women who create them. Be sure to subscribe from wherever you get your podcasts.